I was in my late teens, I played rugby for a local club, and we went on tour to Malawi. And an interesting thing about Malawi, interesting fact, is that in Malawi they grow a particularly strong strain of marijuana called Malawi Gold. Apparently it's really strong. I wouldn't know, obviously, because I'm just a freaking angel. So while we were at the tournament, one of the players went out and did some shopping, and he bought a whole duffel bag full of Malawi Gold, and this was stashed under a seat in the bus. And on the way back, we'd done really well at the tournament, so we were celebrating all the way, and on the way back we were pretty hammered, just beers and beers and beers. And as we got into the town where we lived, we drove past a truck, an army truck that was full of soldiers, and because we were pissed, it seemed like a really good idea that we should all drop our dacks and put our bare asses against the window and give the soldiers a big old brown eye. And the soldiers understandably took umbrage to this, and they pulled us over and basically arrested us. They came onto the bus and they selected 10 people at random, and I happened to be one of them, and they put us in the back of their truck, and then they searched the bus and they found this bag full of Malawi Gold. So that went on the back of the truck as well, and they took us to the local police station, and we were formally arrested and charged with public indecency, being drunk and disorderly, and possession of marijuana. And then they put us inside the cell. So remember, there's 10 of us, put us inside the cell that was about 5 meters by 5 meters, and there was already people in there, and there was nothing else in there except for this bucket in the corner, which was where you went if you wanted to go for a piss or a shit, and it was already sort of full to the brim with all manner of delights. So I said to my mates, nah, don't worry, I got this. Because when they were filling out my charge sheet, they asked me my name, and I told them, and they said, is your father John Gallagher? And I said, yep. Because my dad in a previous life had been a cop, and he had actually been the member in charge for that police station. So all the cops there knew him, and I knew that they would ring him and tell him that I'd been arrested. And sure enough, about an hour later, my dad turned up. He walked in the door, and all the cops were like, hello, Sergeant Gallagher, Sergeant Gallagher. And he was like, good afternoon, men. Lovely to see you, gentlemen. How's the family? Because these guys had known each other. They'd worked together for 20 years. And then he came over to the holding cell, and he stood there with his hands behind his back, looking over the top of his glasses, as was his way, glowering at us. And he held out his hand and he said, charge sheet. So they gave him the charge sheet, and he started reading through it. It was drunken, disorderly, public indecency, boys. And then he got to the bit about possession of marijuana. Now my dad was very against drugs of any form. He didn't drink, he didn't smoke, he didn't partake in any kind of recreational chemicals or anything like that. He was about as close as you could get to being a priest without being, dodgy. And so he had this possession of marijuana. He looked over his glasses at us. He handed the charge sheet back and he said, nah, fuck him. And he turned around and he walked out. He walked out and he left me and my mates in jail. Me. He left me in jail. His son and heir, the fruit of his loins, the inheritor to his estate. We were there for 4 days. 4 days in this holding cell. And once a day, they would bring a trough full of sudza and gravy, and you had to fight to grab something to eat. But you didn't really want to eat anyway, because the trough was pretty near the other bucket, which was full of piss and shit. So after 4 days, they transferred us from the holding cell to the court, and we were in quite a state, feeling pretty sorry for ourselves. And Jesus Christ, we stunk. Man, we stunk to high hell. And so we had the hearing, and we were convicted of public indecency, being drunk and disorderly, and possession of marijuana. And they let us off quite light. We were fined, and we were told to do 20 or 30 hours of community service. So that's how I became a felon. I'm a felon. Me and Tupac. But the epilogue to this story is 20 years later. We were immigrating to New Zealand, and I was filling out the forms, and there was a question there which says, have you been convicted of any crimes? And so I'm an honest fellow, so I said yes. And in the space below where you had to put the details, I wrote that I was convicted of public indecency for showing my ass to armed soldiers, and being drunk and disorderly because I was hammered on the way back from a rugby tournament, and possession of marijuana because some clown in my team decided to buy a duffel bag full of Malawi gold. And I sent the forms in, and we were called to do an immigration interview. And I went into the room. There's a group of people there, this group of Kiwis, and they asked questions about me and about the family and about my job. And then the one guy said, we just want to ask you about this, these convictions, these prior convictions that you've had. So could you give us a little bit of detail about that? So again, because I'm an honest fellow, I told them the story from the beginning. I told them about the rugby tournament and doing brown eyes and being pissed, and somebody bought Malawi gold, and then I told them about the holding cell and the bucket full of shit, and my father leaving us in there and saying fuck him. And the Kiwis thought this was just the funniest thing. They were laughing, and they were taking the piss out of me, and they were asking all these questions. One of the questions they asked was, how did they identify who had pulled the brown eyes? Did they do an identikit? Smart ass. Quite funny though. But then they said, you didn't really read the forms, did you? So I said, why? So because the form actually says, have you been convicted of any crimes in the last 10 years? So you didn't actually need to mention any of this. So I said to him, well, why? Why did you ask me about it? And the guy said, purely for the entertainment value. Wanker. Such a Kiwi thing to do. So anyway, that's how my father left me in jail for 4 days. To teach me a lesson. Not to show my ass to soldiers. And not to be friends with clowns who buy marijuana. Love you.